Welcome back to the JavaScript Essential Training Series. I am Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at where we make our placement of JavaScript inside of our HTML files. So where do I put my JavaScript once I start developing these applications for my web? JavaScript can be placed in the body elements of the web page, the head sections of the HTML pages, or it can actually be externally linked to an external file. When you're working in your HTML document, the JavaScript code must be placed within script tags. And we'll actually demonstrate that in the lab. In the older versions of HTML, those prior to HTML5, the type attribute was used to specify the file type to be JavaScript inside of your HTML document. And then during the lab exercise, we'll demonstrate how to place JavaScript in the head section, the body section, and we'll actually link to an external file so you can see how all three aspects are done. That's how we do it when we're developing our web applications, and I will demonstrate all three of those inside of our lab. So let's move into our development environment and demonstrate how we actually link and place JavaScript inside of our web application.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize our presentation and drop into the development environment so that we can demonstrate what we talked about in the presentation. And we're wanting to look at the three different ways that we can actually implement JavaScript inside of our HTML documents. So the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and confirm that we've got our server up and running, which we do. I'm going to go ahead and load my text editor. Sublime Text 3 will be the text editor I'll be using for this demonstration. And I'm going to use Google Chrome as my browser. I've got my standard template.html file loaded. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. I'm going to save this as placing.html. That's going to actually be the file that we'll use for these exercises. Again, in the event you have access to the exercise files, you will have access to all these files, so you can work through the demonstrations as we go through them. The first one I want to demonstrate, let's demonstrate how we put script in the head section of our HTML document. And that's the one we're most familiar with because we've actually been demonstrating that one for quite a bit in our earlier exercises. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my opening and closing script tags inside of our head section. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a function that we're actually going to trigger to actually run our demonstration. So I'm going to actually go inside my script tags. I'm going to go create a function inside the script tags, get my opening and closing braces. And we're going to be covering functions probably within the next couple tutorials. So don't let the code throw you a curveball. We're going to go through all this code shortly. Then I'm going to go ahead and actually copy from my exercise file what I want executed when I call this function. You'll see I've just got some lorem ipsum text. I've got a document.getElementById that's going to run when I actually execute this function. Inside the body of my code, I'm going to go ahead and put in an H1. So I'm just going to come inside my container element. I'm going to go ahead and put an H1. Then I'm going to put a paragraph. And then right below that paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and put in a button. And we'll talk about this code in 1 second. Let me go ahead and stretch this out a little bit so we don't have the line break in the button. So you'll notice that I put the script tags in the head section of my document. Then inside my script tags, I've built a function called test function. And that function basically is going to put some lorem ipsum text in an element that has an ID of my ID. And you'll notice I've actually given an ID of my ID to the sample paragraph that I have inside the body element of my document. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Then I want to go ahead and refresh the browser window. Actually, I've got to go load the placement.html first, then refresh the browser window. And you'll see that we've got the sample page with our sample paragraph text and this button. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually going to call that function, the script that's inside the head section of our document, when I perform the onClick event on this button. So I'm going to click the button, and you'll notice the paragraph text is changed based on the lorem ipsum that I have inside that function. The beauty of functions is they can perform hundreds of lines of codes as we build our functions, and you're going to learn that as we go through and learn how functions actually operate. If you're following along with some of my other training on PHP, or in the Pro classes, I mean, we've gotten very deep into functions and how we can actually build reusable functions to make our code much more efficient. We'll do the same thing in JavaScript. We can do the same thing with the functions in JavaScript. We can make these very complex. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and add another line of code to our function, just to show you that they're capable of doing many things, many more things than just one item. And basically, I'm just going to address the heading. You'll notice I've got an ID with a heading of heading, and that's my H1. And I'm just going to go ahead and change that text at the same time that I change my paragraph text. Go ahead and save all those changes. Refresh our browser window. When we hit the button, now not only do we change the paragraph, but we also change the heading too. But keep in mind, the tutorial is based on where we're placing our script. This was a demonstration of how we place our script tags in the head section. Next, we're going to look at how we place them in the body of our document. All right, so the next demonstration, I want to demonstrate how we place script text in the body of our document. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and grab all this script, and I'm going to cut it out. That's Control X on the PC, Command X on the Mac. I'm going to cut it out of our head section. I'm going to come down below where I close my container. And actually, it's just before this jQuery script, which we really didn't need for this demonstration. In fact, I'm going to pull it out. It doesn't need to be here for this demonstration. I don't want it confusing anyone. Go ahead and save that change. And then I'm going to put in here, I'm going to paste the script at the end of my content for the body. And the reason we want to put script tags at the end in the body, it's a very good idea to place scripts at the bottom of the body element. And the reason being is this can improve the page load of the page itself. Sometimes scripts can take a while to compile depending upon how complex they are and how much information is contained inside the JavaScript file. So it's much better to put them at the end of the body element. This way everything gets to load first before that script tries to compile and execute. We wouldn't want it in the middle of our body element or at the top of the body element because it could actually slow down the page load. So we tend to put it at the bottom. Go ahead and save those changes. Refresh my browser window. Let's go back and reload that placing.html. Same information, and again, when we hit the change the text, we're changing the same thing. It's performing the same way. The only difference is now we have it placed inside the body element of our HTML document. The key here is when you're placing it in the body element, you want to place it at the end of the body element. That's the best place for it. You want the page to load first in the event that the JavaScript file is long, or in the event actually that someone has their JavaScript turned off. Maybe they don't have that functionality inside their browser window. You wouldn't want the browser hanging up and not loading the website. The next one we're going to look at is the one that we use most often, and that's how we actually load JavaScript into an external file. It's the one that we use most often. It's the one that I recommend. And again, it makes it a lot easier, not only for loading the pages, but it makes it a lot easier as you're working through your changes to documents to keep everything separated from the structure. Same thing with CSS. We keep it separated from structure, so it's easy to keep things up to date, and it's easier to update items in your website when they're actual separate files. All right, so let's look at that one next. All right, so JavaScript can be placed in external files. External scripts are practical when the same code is used in many different web pages, and that's true with most of our websites. As you'll find, the more you start developing web pages, you're going to find a lot of the stuff that you develop for a particular web page or a website is going to be reusable in other sites. So by keeping things in external files, it makes it, one, easy to interchange them between the different web applications that you're building, but also makes it reusable. I mean, everything becomes reusable when they're in separate files. It makes it easy to connect or disconnect from different functionality of the particular site. JavaScript files have a file extension of .js, and to use a script, externally, we have to put the script file in a source attribute with the script tag. So let me show you how I do that. And I normally do this at the end of my document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. It's going to give me a blank document. And I'm basically going to bring this file in, and I'm just going to copy this function. Next, I'm going to cut it and put it in that brand new file. And it's going to be a function. And then I'm going to fix my formatting. Now, one thing I will tell you that normally at the beginning of these files, I will actually put some notes at the very top. I'll usually put comments in here saying what I'm going to do with this file. And that's how I usually leave my notes inside there. And then I'm going to do a file save as. I'm going to save this in the same directory that we're in with our HTML documents. Normally I wouldn't. Normally I'd have a JS directory, but I'm just going to call this helpers.js. And it's not unusual for me to have a helper file inside my web applications. I do that a lot. Helper files, I will usually put a lot of different functions that I'll have in there. Not only for JavaScript I'll have a helper file, but a lot of times I'll actually have a PHP helper file, which will be a lot of functions that I'm going to reuse throughout my application. And it gives me one file to point to so I can go grab these functions when I need them. Good example of this is when I'm doing data confirmation. As I bring data into a database, as I'm cleaning up that data for the database entry, I'll actually use helper functions where I can actually point to different things, because I may use that across an entire web application in many different areas. This way I can write those applications once, those functions, those cleaning functions, or whatever you want to call them, and then I can just point to that function and use it. Anyway, so we've created this helpers.js file. It's in the same directory as the file of our HTML document. Now I'm going to go into my HTML document, and at the very bottom, let me go ahead and pull out this ending script tag. And again, I'm going to normally keep these at the very bottom of my HTML file, usually just before the closing body tag or even after the closing body tag. But I tend to keep them at the closing body tag. So in my opening script tag, I'll put source equal, and then inside of quotation marks, I'll put in the helpers.js, and again, pointing to this JS file that we just created. And then I'm just going to go ahead and close that script tag to let me know that that's where my JS file is. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. And again, I'm keeping this at the very end of the body. I want this to load after my page loads. But now I'm actually pointing to that external file. I've saved all my changes. I should be able to go in now and refresh my browser window. Got my sample text. When I hit my button, I'm actually updating the test just like we did before, but now all my functions are actually located in an external file, and I'm just calling those functions as I need them inside my HTML document. The beauty of this is I could actually recall these functions. If I had 100 pages, I wouldn't have to have that code written 100 times. I could just put in this link to this helper.js file and then just call that function just like we did right here, on click, test function, and it knows to go into the helper.js file, find that test function, and run it. And again, you'll learn a lot more about this as we work through these exercises. I just wanted to demonstrate the 3 different ways that we can bring JavaScript into our HTML documents. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. One thing I do want to point out, because I actually forgot to point this out and I should have, you can place external script references in the head or the body section of the document. I like to keep them in the body because to me, it helps the page load faster. The script will behave as if it was located exactly where the script tag is located in your document, so be careful. And the reason I say that is if I load the script in the body of the document, at the end of the body of the document, and I'm trying to get it to do things, I'm trying to get JavaScript to perform functions before the page is loaded, it's probably not going to happen. And the reason being is that script's not going to actually load into the actual page until that full body element or the full body page is loaded. There's a couple advantages to having scripts externally, and I needed to point these out, and I didn't, and I should have. One, we talked about this, I think, a little bit. When you're developing your HTML code or your HTML scripts, it's best to keep structure separated from presentation. That's the same thing with our script tags. When you're developing your HTML scripts and you're structuring your page, it's best to keep the code separate from the structure of the page. It makes HTML and JavaScript easier to read, and it's also easier to maintain if I don't have script tags and scripts scattered throughout my HTML document, and I keep them in a separate file. Plus, when you load JavaScript files externally, they tend to cache, which actually speeds up page loads. I could actually call this script from many, many different pages, and it's not loading that script each time it calls a page. Once that's loaded, it's actually cached inside the rendering engine, and until that page unloads and clears those caches, it stays there. So it actually makes those other pages load quicker. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that in because it is kind of important. As you're developing your web applications, speed becomes critical for a lot of the things that we're doing, and I wanted you to understand the advantages of actually having JavaScript in external files.